Fay Nicholson is an artist, writer, curator, tracing relationship between form and content whilst elucidating the problematic marriage of history and documentation. She uses orthographic, photographic, performative and textual approaches to making words that are often open and cumulative with specific constraints. Recent projects have focused specifically on the connection between art and documentation, and education and documentation, unpicking current fascination with pedagogy through language and strategies that are both generative and deconstructive. She has recently exhibited in Constitution of the Dam in Norway, the Anti-Library in London, and the newspaper project of Manifesta in Morse. Thank you.
Fourth of the 4th, 2012. From winsmith@gmail.com to margshamir@gmail.com. Subject, sold. Hey Mag, how are you? I'm so tired. I've been in group tutorials all day. And when it was my turn, my work didn't go down too well. And to top it all off, I've just come in from Private View, where one of my mates told me that Contemporary Life, London's hottest gallery right now, is representing James Mann. James is this guy in my course who doesn't really say anything to anyone. He's a student. He's not even graduated, and he's represented by London's hottest gallery. It's just not fair. He comes in every day staring at his paintbrush and whatever. He's so young, and he's already been picked up by Contemporary Life. It's unbelievable. His paintings are now going to be worth about 30 grand. Me and the rest of the people in my year just wandered around, staring glumly into our free beer for the rest of the night. More than being jealous, I don't actually understand. What's so good about his work? It's been done before. His paintings take 10 minutes. He has no idea of what's happened in the art world since 1960, and I don't even know if he's being sincere. How is it possible for anyone to be picked up by a gallery before they've even left college? And how can we, his classmates, compete with that? In fact, he's now doing better than most of his tutors. What's even worse is I can't believe that it's upset me so much. I'm not James and my work is different, but I'm just not sure how we can continue going into college every day, pretending that these external commercial pressures don't exist, or that the university is providing me with the right conditions to succeed. What's the point of knowing how to talk about Deleuze if you don't know how to talk to an art dealer? What's the point of discussing the agency of art if you can't pay the rent? And what's the point of reading Marx if we're all pricing up work for a final show? So many contradictions, I'm not sure what I'm actually getting out of being here right now, especially with the fees being even higher this year. What's art school actually meant to do? And how is it preparing me for the real world? How is it making me a better artist? And how am I ever going to make a living? This school is just too traditional. And what do the parameters of painting, sculpture, and photography even mean? The tutors have been here for years, and it feels removed from everything I care about at the moment. I'm so sorry for this glum email. It's just, I'm getting sick of this. I can't wait to see you and talk about our ideas. Love, Winston. Kiss. 5th of the 4th, 2012. magshamir@gmail.com to winsmith@gmail.com. Subject, resold. Winston, I understand your feelings completely. As you know, the art school that I'm currently in has a slightly different approach to yours, with no divisions in fine art and more emphasis on what might be called discourse. But still, it feels as though many things are left unquestioned. It's as if we're stuck between the figure of the genius within his disciplined modern traditions and the conceptual promise of a creation free from materials, space, or boundaries. In relation to the former, we are expected to produce in a constant and consistent fashion by ourselves, and in relation to the latter, we are told that reductions in space and facilities don't matter, as we are indeed in the age of post-studio practice. I think we should act on our doubts and anxieties and set something in motion. You know, it could be a round table or a series of events looking at this feeling of dissatisfaction. Talk about careers and careerism, about money, about value, about skills and knowledge, about trends and hype within the art world. Why not? There are loads of other students and artists that have set up their own independent art schools over the past few years. It's easy. We could do something like that, couldn't we? With your drive and my experience in organising workshops and things, I'm sure we could pull it off. Just tonight, I was talking with my friend Leah, and she told me about an interesting art school in LA that meets in a bar once a year. It sounds very interesting. Here's a link. Shall we meet next week to discuss? I'll bring some of the others along too. Let's gather some research and do some thinking in advance. Here's to the future. See you soon, Mag. Kiss. The previous emails were sent between Margaret Jamir and Winston Smith in April 2012, about a year before they started their own independent art school in southeast London. I found this email on a memory stick entitled Future School at the Universal State Archive in 2023. The Future School was established by Margaret Winston and a small group of their close friends. And it was originally set up as a place for artists and students to discuss art education and some of the problems that were emerging in the teens. And together they attempted to provide an alternative to the expensive university model. Now myself, I'm an artist from London, and I'm currently researching the connections between art education and documentation. I'm interested in relationships between form and content, between the position of the written or the record in relation to the object or the moment, and in renegotiating the positions of the didactic and the aesthetic. I'm currently positioned at the London Arts University, where I am paid to undertake research. As you may or may not know, in the UK, as part of the 2020 academic economy reforms, most artists in the UK tend to work in either one or two strands, either working as part of the commercial representation scheme, in which you work with a registered gallery to produce artworks that might be sold, or working with the academic economy scheme, where you're paid to undertake research in line with a university. So as an artist subsidised by the academic economy scheme, I'm expected to conduct research in my specialist field and to publish and distribute this in other academic contexts, such as conferences or publications, nationally and beyond. So my research focuses on art education and documentation, and often focuses on the philosophies and approaches of art schools that have come to shape our present situation. A few months ago, I was at the Universal State Archive investigating some of the activities of certain educational groups that grew out of London in the teens. And I came across an envelope crudely marked Future School. Intrigued by the bombast simplicity of this name, I opened it to discover a memory key. On borrowing an old personal computer, and managing to open this rather outdated storage device, I could see it contained a number of folders, the first being labelled preschool, And many of the documents were corrupt, but a few of them I was able to open and have a look at. And the emails that I read at the beginning of this lecture are two of those documents. So this memory stick, as far as I know, contains everything that's been written about or around the future school. I think it provides a brief yet sometimes inconsistent insight into the minds and motivations of a group of young artists trying to set up an alternative educational model in the teens, which of course, as we know now, was a decade of extreme technological change and quite a few social problems. So today at We Are the Time, I would like to present my incomplete research on the future school to you by reading some documents from this memory stick. Now, one other document in the preschool folder was called MZ Research. And I think it's quite interesting. It reveals a little bit about what Margaret Jamir was thinking just before she set up the art school. So, Margaret Jamir, my research. As someone who has studied at several art colleges, I'm interested in how the institution of the art school shapes the values and work of the young artist. I've begun looking at certain institutions and the models they put in place to teach people. I'm investigating everything from the application process, the available space and equipment, and how criticism and discussion sit alongside making and material experimentation, and also how the educational moment is valued and assessed. The way that institutions structure their courses obviously establishes value systems and propagates certain ways of working over others. A practical example of this is a final show in which universities may encourage top commercial galleries to attend, and this inevitably places students and their work in a certain position. From examining the different values, I soon came to question what might be the essential purpose of an art education in the first place, asking myself if there were other ways artists could teach themselves without the imposing hierarchies and frivolous bureaucracy of an institution. One interesting book that I found that examines the way art students are moulded to the ideals established perhaps by particular tutors within institutional contexts is called Art Students Observed. This book is a sociological observation of two British art schools during the 1960s. And although the name of these is given as Midville College, it is rumoured that it was in fact Coventry Art College, where the conceptual art group Art and Language first met whilst teaching. There are several self-evaluations quoted in the books. One is by a first-year fine art student who reflects on her art school experience. I feel as if I have wasted a lot of time. I am not sure how far this has been a real waste. It has been depressing and terrifying at times. I thought I knew what I wanted to do, but now I don't know. I wonder whether I should be here, or whether anyone should be. The symbiotic relationship between institutions and individuals is very interesting, as it's not only the institution that structures the individual, but the individual that shapes the institution, from visionary directors and tutors to active or rebellious students. But does the institution prepare artists to enter the real, perhaps professional world? Or does it result from separating them from it even further? And how do its academic and architectural structures, which are both established in their physicality and heritage, and also temporary in their transient usage by successive cohorts, shape these relationships? And if they should wish to do so, is it possible for students to shape the institution from within? And what strategies could be employed to do this, and how far could students make use of existing structures? I've begun looking at smaller and lesser-known institutions, independent organisations that were set up by individuals as alternatives to institutional frameworks that challenge the traditional hierarchical power relations, such as Mountain College in LA, or Department 21, or the Proto Academy in the UK. Department 21 was an additional interdisciplinary department established by students in the Royal College of Art at the beginning of the teens. In one way, their radical gesture of anti-specialisation was accepted into the traditionally departmentalised college by the fact that they formed one more department within the total institutional structure. In this way, Department 21 was both opposite and part of its host institution, establishing a place to practice an undisciplined discipline. Other structures that could be established to question institutions could be parasitic, such as the Proto-Academy in Edinburgh. The Proto-Academy was established by Charles Esch in 1998. In his text, Start with a Table, he describes the project as such. The Proto-Academy was established as a very simple metaphor, the idea of an empty table, or tabula rasa. Whoever came to the table was a member of the Proto-Academy, whether it was a teacher or a student or somebody from the outside. They demonstrated their qualifications to be part of the group by the information, the intelligence, and the ideas or questions that they brought to that table. These particular independent groups existed as supplements or parasites to established schools. Perhaps this is an interesting approach, or perhaps it recontextualizes any radical or critical activity within a traditional academic framework and rendering its agency obsolete. Perhaps the Mountain School in LA is a more interesting model. Through conducting this research, I hope to formulate my own independent art group with Winston Smith. In fact, this research constitutes the emergence of this educational group, where a few of us get together on a weekly basis to discuss art institutions and discuss ideas for our own possible approaches to self-led education. This group will be called the Future School. And the final document that was in the preschool folder was a link, or was a screen grab of the link that was mentioned in Margaret's first email and in her research text. I thought it was quite interesting to read. So, School of Thought. What underlies creativity? Every January, a handful of students go to a bar in Chinatown to find out. Tuition is free, but the drinks aren't, by Kate Wolf. Language is data, says Joseph Mosconi as he begins his lecture. The meaning doesn't matter. Mostly in their mid-20s to early 30s, the students look younger, fresh-faced and dressed in an easy style. Some wear tennis shoes, other high-heeled boots. They sit wrapped in a circle with notebooks on their laps. If not for the soft hum of an ice machine and the strains of New Orleans jazz wafting from the cocktail lounge below, they could be in a grad school classroom. Instead, they're upstairs at the Mountain Bar, the hipster watering hole in Jinling Way in Chinatown, whose dimly lit, blood-red interior sports voluptuous light fixtures shaped like lotus blossoms. As Mosconi, a poet and linguist who works for Google, talks about the rigors of his previous job, creating lexicons for semantic text processing and online advertising, and how that work bears on his creative process, Piero Gilia meanders in and out of the room a few times before flopping onto a low black couch. A well-known conceptual artist, he's one of the co-founders of the Mountain School of Arts. The institution, if that's an apt term for an enterprise housed in a bar, that has made Mosconi's lecture possible. Gilia is not your typical administrator, however, and this is not your typical art school. The 13 students present are in week 2 of a non-accredited tuition-free program that is driven only by the teachers' and the students' desire to take part. Though its curriculum is unstructured, with no course description or syllabus in sight, an average 3-month session could include nude figure drawing with Italian contemporary artist Vanessa Beecroft, a talk by conceptual artist Dan Graham, an overnight field trip to Joshua Tree National Park to visit the high desert test sites of sculptor and installation artist Andrea Zittel, a visit from dancer Simone Forti, and a performance by punk bassist Mike Watt. There's just one thing that these art students won't get to do. At the Mountain, says artist Eric Wesley, the school's other co-founder, you don't make art. The next folder in the memory stick was entitled Curriculum A, and I was extremely excited on opening this folder to find what looked to be a manifesto for the future school. What do you need to know? What is the purpose of art school? What should it teach you and how? And can art be taught? For many years, people have spoken about art's incapacity to be assimilated into the homogeneous structures of post-Fordist society. The antithetical relationship between art and the standardization apparent in education begins at school, when children are educated out of creativity to fulfill the needs of a society driven by economics. As Addison and Burgess have written, obedience is achieved through a mechanistic pedagogy in which learning and assessment are based on repetition and replication. The examination is the means for regulating this process. In many ways, it is a process that mirrors the factory production line and the etiquette of bureaucratic control. Why should art courses have to conform to the university models applicable to other disciplines? Why should art students work towards achieving a grade? Why should artists validate their practice by going to university at all? Whilst other forms of cultural production, such as music, are beginning to circumvent the corporate monopolies of production, distribution, and consumption through platforms made available through new digital media and the internet, why does art still plod along to the same traditional tune, being further assimilated into, rather than existing apart from, legitimating hierarchical structures? Simon Sheikh eloquently discloses the increasing success of the art school despite the call for alternatives that many artists now make. Within the art world itself, academies are prevalent, if not hegemonic. If one looks at contemporary galleries, museums, and international biennials, the artists represented there are almost exclusively all academy trained, a huge difference to the ratio of just, say, 20 or 30 years ago. Here at the Future School, we want to talk to you, our art students and artists of London and beyond. We urge you to leave the panopticons of your lecture theatres, to break out of these rigid models of communication that force you into the passive role of spectator day after day. We want you to leave your workshops and studios, canteens and seminar rooms. Stand up. Ignore your timetables, take the lift down to the ground floor, walk past the receptionist and through those big glass doors. Leave your academies and join us. Join us to ask, as the next generation of artists, what is it that you actually need to know to become an artist? Join us, and together we can bring art education into the future. Future School 2013. So accompanying this rather bold manifesto was a diagram that outlined their curriculum. You can see it consists of 4 parts. There's the form of knowledge, production of value, limitation of space-time, and the material of language. So I assumed that these 4 parts came together to provide the curriculum for the Future School. Now, within the memory stick, I saw that there were 4 folders that seemed to correlate with this diagram. And the first one, the production of value, there was a text, some notes about the curriculum by Winston Smith. The Future School Curriculum, 2014 to 15. As Nicholas Siepen and Asia Sonisdotter have said in their text, Learning by Doing, Reflections on Setting Up a New Art Academy, self-organised structures transform everything that you have to learn and every educational moment into self-education. The Future School has made quite a leap since the original meetings that Mag and I set up a year ago. The free school that we now run from our studios involves meeting once a week with our student contributors to discuss our current research and share work. These discussions, and the school as a whole, are structured by the thematic curriculum that we devised during our early meetings. The first aspect of the Future School curriculum is called the production of value. And like all aspects of the curriculum, encompasses a theoretical research project and a practical learning task. Each student enrolled at the Future School, of which there are currently 12, must conduct and present their research on the production of value to the rest of their group at our weekly meetings, with each student taking it in turn to lead a session. Many of the students have expressed how much they enjoy the lack of hierarchy and the collapse of the traditional student-teacher relationships within the Future School. One student, Jelena, refers to rancière in our meetings, stating that by putting students in charge of teaching other students, we are assuming the equality of intelligence and following the models that Rancière set out in his book, The Ignorant Schoolmaster. Returning to Siepen and Sonnesdotter, they state that self-organized structures are fundamentally shaped by a lack of payment or budget, which means that, with regard to institutional power relations, the distinction between those who pay and those who get paid is largely dissolved. We face the free market alone, but together, which, returning to the production of value, is the practical flip side of the independent position. In the Future School, we speak to each other as equals. No one pays for their tuition, but on the other hand, no one gets paid for teaching. As the initiators of the Future School, Margaret and I also set a practical task or brief to be done by all Future School members over a 3-month period. The task for the production of value is actually a competition. We have asked all students to attempt to make as much of a profit from their work as possible within 3 months. In this way, they must very practically consider what it is they want to produce, how to produce it, which platform to distribute it, and how much to charge for it. The student that makes the most amount of profit at the end of the 3 months gets to set the task for the next part of the curriculum and gets to keep half of their earnings, with the other half being channeled back into the Future School to help us with some rent for paying for more space and investing in equipment. Some of the approaches to this task that have been mentioned by students already have included making expensive paintings and attempting to befriend collectors, usually accompanied with some amount of Facebook book stalking and desperate private view networking, making multiples and high editions, such as photocopied posters, and selling them for £5 in trendy bookshops and outside of galleries, developing bold performances involving nudity or institutional critique, and trying to convince university and gallery directors to pay you to come and deliver them, creating absorbing populist videos and sharing them on the internet whilst trying to garner revenue through securing advertising on your site. I'm very interested to see which student will come out on top. In the next folder, which is called The Limitations of Space-Time, there was a task. So I thought it was quite interesting to maybe see how this task might differ from the other competition. So the task for the limitations of space-time. We all wish we had more space and time in which to make work. We are all aware of the ecstatic speed at which information travels and the need to respond and produce within ever-shortening deadlines. We are also aware of the cost and value of space and the difficulties acquiring it causes young artists today. Can you work beyond these constraints? Create a piece of work using the minimum amount of space and time possible. All works produced will be shown in the smallest and shortest exhibition ever, curated collaboratively at the Future School in June. And there was another document called Rose's Research, and I assume that Rose must have been a student on the Future School, and this was her offering for one of the research discussions. It contains a couple of quotes. So, Robert Filiu, Teaching as Performing Arts. Why do artists specialise? Problem of time, of course. Problem of limits of everyone, of interests and aptitudes. And then there was a text, some selected text from Other Spaces by Foucault. The present epoch will be the epoch of space. We are in the epoch of simultaneity. We are in the epoch of juxtaposition, the epoch of near and far, of the side by side, of the dispersed. We are in a moment, I believe, in our experience of the world, is less that of a long life developing through time than that of a network that connects and points and intersects with its own scheme. Our epoch is one in which space takes for us the form of relations between sites. Perhaps our life is still governed by a certain number of oppositions that remain inviolable, that our institutions and practices have not yet dared break down. These are oppositions that we regard as simple givens, for example, between private space and public space, family space and social space, cultural space and useful space, between the space of leisure and that of work. There was also an email in the Limitations of Space-Time. So 12th of the 6th, 2015, to W. Smith at thefutureschool.com, to M. Jamir at thefutureschool.com, future tutors. Hey Mag, yesterday went really well, didn't it? Due to our recent expansion and the revenue that we've been generating from the production of value module, I now think it could be possible to start paying us a wage for running this thing. I was also thinking it could be good to invite a couple of other students to help take up more permanent teaching roles within the future school, helping us with admin and programming and things like that. I really liked Rose's last research presentation on the limitations of space-time. Her references to Foucault and Filier and the way she brought together their arguments was novel and well thought through. I think she'd make a great tutor, and I'm sure she'd accept our offer now that we can offer to pay her a little bit of cash. I know you like Chris and had mentioned the possibility of working with him, working with us more closely. However, I'm finding him a little arrogant. He's been challenging a lot of the things I've proposed recently, and I think he'd be difficult to work with. I'd rather go with Rose. I think she's more fun. Win. Kiss. So in the third folder, the material of language, there was one text that seemed to be a scan from a book. Perhaps this was also some research. Material of language. The text was by Bruce Archer, and it was called Time for a Revolution in Art and Design Education, 1978. And I've done some research about this, and I think it was actually published in the Royal College of Art. It is significant that modern English has no word equivalent to literacy and numeracy, meaning the ability to understand, appreciate, and value those ideas which are expressed through the medium of making and doing. We have no word equivalent to science and the humanities, meaning the collected experience of the material culture. Yet the output of the practical arts fills our museums and galleries and equips our homes, constructs our cities, constitutes our habitat. Anthropology and archaeology, in seeking to know and understand other cultures, set at least as much store by the art, buildings, and artifacts of those cultures as they do by the literature and science. On the face of it, if the expression of ideas through the medium of doing and making represents a distinctive facet of a culture, then the transmission of the collected experience of doing and making facet should represent a distinctive area in education. The most fundamental intellectual tools in any discipline are an agreed terminology, an agreed method of classifying the phenomena handled, and, most valuable of all, an agreed method for comparing, ordering, or measuring. In other words, a discipline needs a language, a taxonomy, and a metrology. Leaving aside the technological questions and literal questions capable of being handled within the science and within the humanities, where are the tools of language, taxonomy, and metrology capable of handling the central issues of design excluded by the special conditions of those other fields? In language, we have an answer. There is also a task in the material of language folder. What do you think are the most important terms in art and design? Most important terms in art and art education? Create your own glossary with definitions that are appropriate to your practice. For example, aesthetic, an appreciation of the visual or superficial appearance of style, or the way something looks, its decorative nature, the way an object or moment offers itself for semiotic consumption, often synonymous with beautiful. Or didactic, relating to talking, the establishment of a one-way linear communication structure, telling people something, instructive, one-sided, often synonymous with teaching. Publish and distribute this glossary in a manner most appropriate to your work. And then the last folder on the memory stick in Curriculum A was Form of Knowledge. And in it there were some minutes from a roundtable discussion or a roundtable conference, and then a press release. So the press release was published in 2017. The Future School kindly invites you to our 2017 conference on the 16th of March, which will adopt the format of a round table to discuss forms of knowledge in relation to contemporary art. Joining the round table are Michael Schwab, artist and the founder of the Journal of Artistic Research, Irmgard Emil Haynes, independent writer and scholar based in Guatemala City, Tom Hollett, art historian and writer, currently teaching at the Akademie der Bildenden Kunst in Vienna. I'm sorry for my pronunciation of that. And Richard Sennett, a writer also based in the US. And Simon Critchley, an English philosopher currently teaching at the New School in New York. Speakers have been selected and invited by students at the Future School and will join the cohort to openly discuss the form of knowledge in relation to art and education over the course of the day. So here are the meetings from that conference, so the minutes from that conference. 12 o'clock, intro by Margaret Jamir, thank yous, etc. Mention of economic and educational context, discussion of independent art schools, and she quotes Irit Rogoff. "12:30. Presentation of research by student, a typology of different academic structures that in different ways have come to form knowledge. Students and guests discuss. 1:30. Michael Schwab introduces his work with the Journal of Artistic Research, tries to define what knowledge in relation to artistic practice might be. In this statement, he says, "Artistic research is not a limitation to art, but a new way to focus art on the essential question of knowledge. Knowledge is not the opposite of art, but at work from inside it. Art can be put forward as a hunch, or an idea, or a test that challenges both the artist and the audience. Artistic research makes the hunch explicit and sharpens its meaning. It may use devices that delay or divert knowledge, not in order to escape the question of knowledge, but to deepen it. It is not clear what knowledge is. It is not clear that if we think we know something, we actually know something." This begins to spark interest in the group about how we know something and when we know something. Simon Critchley is getting impatient with these vague definitions of knowledge and the abstract, semi-mythical ways of invoking it. Schwab becomes slightly defensive, and Richard Sennett tries to placate the situation. 1:45, there's a break for lunch. 2:30, there is a discussion on research within art universities and the position of the PhD, which is, of course, widely established. Winston Smith states that PhDs are a result of academic inflation and an attempt to homogenize the creative act. He calls for art to assume an autonomous position within culture. 2:45, Tom Hollett states that this attempt to establish educational alternatives is in fact nothing new, and mentions Hornsey Art School, which students occupied in 1968. He said, dissenting students and staff gathered to discuss new terms and models of a networked, self-empowering, and politically relevant education within the arts. He quoted the book, The Hornsey Affair, written by staff and students of Hornsey Art College, which said, "This was described as the replacement of the old linear specialized structure by a new network, open, non-specialized structure, it would give the kind of flexible training in generalized, basic creative design that is needed to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances, be a real training for work. In fact, the qualities needed for such a real training are no different from the ideal ones required to produce maximal individual development. In art and design, the choice between good workmen and geniuses is spurious. Any system worthy of being called education, any system worthy of the emerging new world, must be both at once. It must produce people whose work or vocation is the creative, general transformation of the environment. 3 o'clock. A future school student follows on from this by mentioning Robert Filliou, the former economist and Fluxus artist. She states that Robert Filliou described art as creatively organizing your leisure. 3:05. At this point, Irmgard Emil-Haynes animatedly joins the debate, stating, "But can't you see? These avant-garde ideals of the 60s and 70s are no longer an alternative, having been swallowed up by neoliberalism themselves. Creatively organizing your leisure is now something that Apple, Orange, Google, or American Apparel help you do. We must ask ourselves, how have art and its production been influenced by the predominance of neoliberalism and by the shift towards cognitive production as a source of surplus value? Is contemporary art now subsumed to the rule of market interests, caught in the Adornian impasse between life and death?" 3:15, Tom Hollett continues by saying the notion of knowledge production implies a certain placement of thinking, of ideas, within the present knowledge economy, i.e., the dematerialized production of current post-Fordist capitalism. The repercussions of such a placement within art and education can be described as an increase in standardization, measurability, and the molding of artistic work into the formats of learning and research. 3:20. Several future school members ask whether the implications of this knowledge economy impact on the future school. 3:25. Irmgard Emil-Haynes replies by stating, "Despite aligning yourselves with independent models, as individuals, you are all part of a creative class, adopting a common lifestyle that cuts across and ties together the different registers of work, leisure, self-actualization, and social goods. What you seem to be doing as a college is producing knowledge, or at least attempting to. Academia, by way of critical theory and art history, ensures the validation of art as a form of knowledge within the market. The reason for this is twofold. In the current economic order, on the one hand, the sector of arts and culture is seen as a potential financial boom, where it has become necessary to invest. On the other hand, following Jean Baudrillard, art has fulfilled its avant-garde potential, having morphed everywhere to become embedded in everyday life. You must realize that rather than standing apart from the predominant economic or educational system, your conference itself is part of that immaterial knowledge economy, of cognitive production and semiotic consumption. 3:40. Winston Smith is defensive and starts blurting out quotes from the ignorant schoolmaster, whereas Margaret is silent and seems to take a more philosophical approach. 3:45, Simon Critchley, who has been trying to comment for the past hour, loses his patience and decides to make a statement. Can you all be quiet? And what's all this talk about Rancière? I thought this was an art school. Are you training to be artists or critics? In some ways, I agree with Irmgard about the recuperation of modes of critique, expression, and dissent by a capitalist system that feeds on the immaterial exchanges of a digital, networked generation. But I think we need to take a step back here. Are we supposed to be talking about forms of knowledge? We've mentioned knowledge, but not form. We are steeped in theory, but have not spoken of practice. We seem to be replicating a top-down model or theory as legitimation of the artist, where artists are made to feel stupid by their inability to master theory with a capital T, which usually means a stack of text, usually translated from French, with authors beginning with D, sometimes F, or B. I've always been interested in people who can do something that I can't do. Heart surgeons, cartographers, tap dancers. I'm also interested in artists. I think the issue here is in different modes of articulation or different models of thinking. My conviction is that art thinks, just as music thinks or tap dancing thinks. Philosophy is largely a conceptual enterprise. It's thinking about thinking. The question is trying to find a way, not a method, but a way of approaching how and what art thinks in its own terms, without drowning art in theory. To try and understand or read whatever it is we call art from the standpoint of some theory is inevitably to miss the phenomenon. It's to reduce a visual, spatial, or medial language to a theoretical meta-language. It's used to engage in a kind of cod philosophy, with a lot of useless jargon that's meant to intimidate the non-initiated. That is, to reduce art to ideas about the thing rather than the thing itself. What interests me is the thing itself and the thing itself in its truth. How the specificity of a thing, an installation, a performance, whatever, might be approached in its own terms and not translated into the blah, blah, blah. By the truth of the artistic thing, I do not mean logical or empirical truth. I mean truth as a form of creation. If the work is the illustration of theory, then it is usually bad art or bad theory. When works illustrate a theory, then this is a philosophugal approach, where theory spins out from itself to cover an artwork. In opposition to this, I want to posit an artopetal approach, where theory is drawn into the orbit of the thing, and whatever reflections there are pulled back to the work's centre of gravity. 4 o'clock. Winston and another student expressed their annoyance at conversations about art always coming back to the thing, the art object. Winston quotes Susie Gablick and states, within the dominator system, art has been organised around the supremacy of objects rather than their relationships, and has been set apart from reciprocal or participative interactions. 4:05, there is heated discussion as the group splits into two camps, discussing the importance of the art object in itself and the idea of an artist as a producer of objects. 4:10, Richard Sennett, who has remained peaceful all afternoon, directs a question to the group. We talk about knowledge and the divisions between practice and theory, but knowledge doesn't only reside in the mind. What about practical knowledge? Do you teach practical skills at this school? Alongside this implicit knowledge, would you say that you each develop and share tacit knowledge? 4:15, Winston Smith replies by repeating the phrase, teach skills and disbelief. 4:16, Richard Sennett continues by discussing embedded knowledge. Embedding stands for a process essential to all skills, the conversion of information and practices into tacit knowledge. If a person had to think about each and every moment of waking up, he or she would take an hour to get out of bed. When we speak of doing something instinctively, we are often referring to behavior we have routinized so that we don't have to think about it. In developing a skill, we develop a complicated repertoire of procedures. In the higher stages of skill, there is constant interplay between tacit knowledge and self-conscious awareness, the tacit knowledge serving as an anchor, the explicit awareness serving as critique and corrective. It seems to me that by re-evaluating the nature of skill, craft, and tacit knowledge, it may provide a way out of this round table situation, where we debate in borrowed words without seeming to move forward. 4:20, Margaret Jamir interrupts and says, I've never thought about this before, but now I realise we've completely neglected this definition of knowledge. failing to value it at all within our curriculum. Perhaps we could try to move slightly away from theoretical models towards more interactive solutions. Perhaps there's a quote by Piero Aguirre which is relevant here. He says, "The preeminence of speech within pedagogical settings should be diminished, and with it, the anxiety as to the profitability of education in terms of information richness or in terms of symbolic art market priorities. Instead, we should refocus on the embodiment of experience and encounter." 420. There is disarray around the table. No consensus or conclusion is made, and the individuals agree to disagree. So that's quite a, as you can see, I think that particular round table went well, but I'm not sure what happened to the future school after this, apart from in Curriculum B, there were 3 final documents. One was an email from winsmith@gmail.com to mag@futureschool.org. "Hey Mag, sorry for the silence and not getting back to your email. I agree, I think it's time to officially move on. In fact, I don't think I can or want to be part of the future school at this point in my life. In fact, I want a clean break and a new start. I saw Rose last week. She told me that you're still carrying on, meeting with new students, testing out new ideas and approaches. She said that you've even developed a new curriculum, and a novel one at that, a return to process and materials at a time of desired outcomes and immateriality. But hey, if you want to carry on, it's not for me to stop you. James Mann's got me in to teach at the university where he occasionally works at, so it's not all doom and gloom, dare I say. One last request, though. If possible, can you please take down the website and related material, etc.? I'd rather not have the ghosts of the past haunting my new endeavours. And no offence, but I'd rather not be associated with the past of the future school. I don't mean to sound bitter. We just had to go our separate ways. Best win." So here's the diagram that was mentioned, which I have to admit looks really similar to the previous diagram, except it seems that the terms have been switched around. So, for example, rather than form of knowledge, we have knowledge of form, or rather than production of value, we have value of production. And finally, there was a PDF, which was the new Future School Manifesto. See, touch, bend, surface, scratch, build, think, bright, heavy, balance, use, smooth, drop, break, tear, burn, sink, cast, press, look, reflect, repeat. To reject mechanical or habitual application is to promote inductive studies, recognizing practice before theory, trial and error before insight. In short, we believe in learning by experience, which naturally lasts longer than anything learned by reading or by hearing only. Joseph Albers, Search versus Research. Humankind is networked across the globe. Information spreads like a virus, and virtual social spaces are visited more than real ones. We ask you to put your admin aside, ignore your Google Calendar, stop redesigning your website, and join the new future school. Without interaction with tools, engagement with materials, and encounters with situations, we do not develop a sensual understanding and haptic knowledge of the world, how to perceive it, to manipulate it, or work within it. We are neglecting our visual, material, and temporal instincts and our aptitude for developing unique skills. The media we use mediates what is made. It controls the output, determines the form. If ideas are presented through language, meaning rests within the limits of your vocabulary. The conduit shapes the ideas it delivers. At the new future school, the curriculum runs as follows. Rather than studying the material of language, we explore the language of material. Rather than examining the limitations of space-time, we utilize the space and time that emerge within set limitations. Rather than researching the production of value, we consider the values of production, and instead of analysing the form of knowledge, we acquire knowledge of form. We gain first-hand experience of working with certain materials to gain tacit knowledge. We encourage experience, material testing, and trial and error over theoretical hypothesis within academic frameworks. The class is a laboratory where we aim for conscious seeing and articulation through understanding the properties of material and how to manipulate them. To develop critical judgment, one must understand first what is being questioned. Leave your auditoriums and return to the mess of your studios and the unknown outcomes of your potential future experiments. As Albus said, art here means more a process of living than a product or its production. Art as an educational means aims at an intense use of our senses and a broad and deeper vision of the self and the world. That was the last document on the memory stick, and as far as I know, there are no other traces of the Future School existing online. I've looked online, and I've been to the Universal State Archive. I've been rooting around for information on Margaret Shamir and Winston Smith, but I can't find anything. But my future task when I return to the London Arts University will be to start to analyse the information that was found on the stick. So that was just the beginning of my research. Thank you.